One chapter is called the Guatemala Syndrome. This chapter identifies two of the major characters, or more significantly, the forces that these characters represent. They're both real. One is a person, the other a corporation. Aisalanthus Sinclair III is a very real person. Most of the details of his life are factual. He was one of the prime forces in setting up the OSS and the CIA. Some of the details later in the novel may not have been things he personally did, but they were activities carried out by the CIA that he helped create. Bananas International is a very real corporation, a corporation who exploited the land and the people of Latin America. Eloise James represents a part of me and part of the events and situations that I was personally involved in. Also, she tells some of the research that I did. This particular chapter ends saying, "But that's another story." It really is not another story. It's a chapter of the same story. But those who control information and media would love us to believe that these stories are not interrelated, but are simply stories of themselves, that they're not really related, and anything else is another story. Chapter 3 is called the Guatemala Syndrome. Eloise James had no memory of the Great Depression. She was born shortly after most persons had begun to recover from that depression. However, her parents frequently spoke about the depression. The earliest memories of Eloise James center around the days of World War II. She remembers the air raid warnings and the blackouts that went with them. Many Americans have no memory of such events. Eloise and her family lived less than a mile from one of the largest steel-producing complexes in the United States. Eloise remembers that travel was restricted. Most foods were rationed. Life was very restricted. Her world was tiny. It was only as large as her two little feet and her tricycle would permit her to explore. Even the world permitted by her feet and her tricycle were further restricted by her mother's veto. And that veto pretty well restricted her world to the breadth of her mother's gaze and the range of her mother's voice. One day, Eloise and two of her companions tried to broaden that range. As they played in her sandbox, they decided to dig down to China. But again, her own physical limitations severely restricted her range. In her sandbox world, Eloise could not imagine nuclear waste penetrating to a land her shovel would not permit her to penetrate. The China syndrome was definitely not a part of Eloise's childhood memories. Nor did Eloise realize that if her shovel were to penetrate in a more oblique direction, she might reach Guatemala or Nicaragua. Her only contact there was trying to learn the words to a popular song. Managua, Nicaragua is a wonderful spot. Had Eloise Shovel been able to penetrate to that area of the globe, she would have discovered a different type of rationing, a more severe limitation on goods, and one that would not cease at the end of the war, or one which would be lifted as she became able to take care of herself. Eloise learned reality from her sandbox. Reality was taught to the natives of Nicaragua and Central America by Bananas International and other large producers of fruit. Eloise's world was restricted by her size. The world of Central Americans was restricted by the size of the fruit companies. Bananas International owned much of the land in Central America. There were few roads, even fewer railways. Bananas International owned the railways. They also owned the ports, the electric utilities. They owned just about everything that affected the lives of people, including people's time. Eloise was so young she had not yet developed any memory. If she had any sense of memory and had been able to read at the time of her birth, she would remember that on the day her birth was announced in the local paper, there was also a small article about Bananas International. The article told of the work of Averill and Ivan Dunbar in arranging a cozy deal for Bananas International, who were taking control of a Guatemalan railroad. Schwaben Bank, a German bank controlled by the Nazis, was handling the deal. The brothers Dunbar and the German bank stood to make a tidy profit from the sale. Averill was attorney for the Schwaben Bank. Ivan was on its board of directors. The brothers Dunbar were rather obscure at the time of Eloise's birth. But before she finished high school, Ivan had become Secretary of State. Averill had become director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Schwaben Bank would become one of the principal depositories of CIA money. But that's another story.